Welcome to Unapologetically Sensitive, where you can learn, relate, laugh, and maybe even live a bolder, brighter life. I'm your host, Patricia Young. This is a weekly podcast where we explore the strengths we have because of our sensitivity and some of the challenges it poses as well. The information in this podcast is not a substitute for help from a licensed mental health professional. Hey there. To the creatives, healers, sensitives, and deep thinkers, how the heck are you? We are towards the end of August 2023 now. You know, I forgot to say this, but there are more than 300 podcast episodes that I've released now. If you're wondering how can we be in the episode of the 200s, there are 99 bonus episodes. When I first started the podcast, I recorded bonus episodes and numbered them separately. So I think that's just pretty amazing. How are you? How's the weather? It's probably hot wherever you're at. I do not like the heat. I don't like humid heat. But anyways, this episode with Jen, I think it's so real and raw and vulnerable. And I was thinking about, you can see the trajectory of our relationship. We started recording together in December of 2022. So it's been about a year and a half now that we've been recording. And so much of the beginning was about many of my attachment injuries. And currently, I'm sure there's many more to come up. That's just part of being human. But it's just so nice to see this place of trust that I'm in my relationship with Jen and the things that we talk about. And now having this whole new understanding of neurodivergence and how we talk about figuring out what's the social rule. And I'm supposed to do this, but I thought I was supposed to do that. And is this ableist? And is this how we work with people that are neurodivergent? And we talk about quite a few specific examples of things that have been going on recently and how we navigated them. And something that Jen said to me when I was upset while I was in the Poconos with her and what language did feel better. I also talk about something, and I share this afterwards, that when I have an emotional charge on something, I typically tend to speak faster and my volume increases. And I don't even know that it's going on in the moment. And when I was done sharing, and then I had this awareness like, oh, I just did it again. It's almost like that not masking, that the masking part of me keeps everything under control and what I think is socially acceptable. And when I get passionate, that part of me that kind of manages how I show up goes offline. And then I think I have some shame and embarrassment because I'm not monitoring myself. So it's just very interesting. But I think that this is a great episode. One of the things that Jen quotes is Gabor Mate, who says it's safe and healthy to feel a full range of feelings. And that's really what we talk about, is all the ways that things can come up. We do talk about what could be autistic, what could be allistic, who makes the rules about what is normal and average. I don't know. I always tend to think these are great episodes. So I think with that, now on to the show. Hey, Jen.
Hi, Patricia.
How are you?
I'm okay, I think. I don't know. Yeah. I haven't had time to check in with myself today, so I don't know. Your guess is as good as mine right now.
Okay. Where are you recording from?
I am recording from my basement office / art studio. Where are you recording from?
Sadly, I am not upstairs from you.
Yeah, I know.
I'm back in San Diego in my office where I normally record.
We're on separate coasts.
I know. It was funny when we used Marco Polo. I think it was yesterday, Tuesday, and you were sitting in your living room. I was thinking, I know exactly where you're sitting. And I was sitting there 24 hours ago. It's such a different experience, as I was thinking about our friendship and how we used primarily Marco Polo and Zoom when we did our recording for the HSP online course. And then we recently started FaceTiming, and mostly Marco Polo. And then we used more FaceTime, and then having these in-person exchanges and spending 8 days together. That's a long time. And it's just, I don't know, it's just beautiful how our friendship is unfolding, and there's room for both of us to be where we're at. And I don't know, I'm just feeling really fulfilled and grateful.
Me too. Thank you so much. Yeah, it was very beautiful. And I did love the experience. I know going to your space. I forget if I talked about it on the podcast, but I had this really kind of surreal experience where I felt like I had walked into like a place that I had imagined in my mind, right? So many times and seen little pictures of, so from a 2-dimensional angle on Marco Polo or on FaceTime, but then like I got to step fully into this world. It was like so cool.
Well, and it's interesting too, how we process information differently, I know when I got to your house, I'd seen your house on Marco Polo. You showed me when you moved in, I've seen it, but it was so much smaller than I expected. Yeah. And your reflection was in California, the homes are just different. And I noticed when I was back east, this must be a hidden special interest that I don't know that I have about square footage and architecture, because if I could go up to every person's house and go, what is the footprint of your house? How many square feet? And then if you add the basement and the first floor and the second floor, how many square feet is it? Like, it's fascinating to me. And you had reflected, because the homes in California are mostly where I live, it's mostly 1 story. So our house is a 5-bedroom, 3-bath. Part of that is my mom's place, but it's big and it's spread out. We've remodeled. And maybe my brain was just expecting that what I saw on Polo was exactly the same size as what we have, and just could not make that accommodation for something smaller. But it's fascinating. And then I think you asked me, like, what were my highlights or my favorite points of what happened? And often in the moment when I'm experiencing something, I don't know if I'm having a good time or not. Like, I know I'm not in pain, but it takes me time to process the experience, to get back to where I'm at. And you had asked me, and I'm like, I don't think my brain works that way. So it's just fascinating to me to see how we assimilate, how we adjust, all of those things.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. So just to describe my little house, right? It's like I have technically 2 stories, but then I have an attic and a basement. So it's it makes sense. I guess in California, you wouldn't really build up as much like that with earthquakes and stuff, I would imagine.
It depends on the soil. Like the contractor that we've used to add onto our house says our soil is too expansive, so he would not build up.
I see.
So it's not an option here where we live. That's not true for all of San Diego.
I see. And I also know, like, my living room is kind of a pain to situate because it's a 100-year-old house. So it's not really geared up around TVs or the way more modern homes would be geared up. So it was so fun having you in my space. And then, now it's like having memories of you in my space. And it's just very, very sweet. And I know a lot of us, I think, these days are experiencing very deep relationships that happen online, right? And it's interesting, the use of technology, Marco Polo, stuff like that. And then being able to do it the old-fashioned way, like meet face to face. It's really, really funny.
Right. It's interesting too. I was noticing how I got up in the morning before you did. So often I would go down and maybe wash the dishes or empty the dishwasher or something. And it was interesting. Like, I noticed that the handles of the mugs faced towards the wall and not outwards. And I think that this is part of when we mask and how we look for social cues and how we try and get the lay of the land. And when I grew up, things like that were very, very important, that the people in my family, even outside of my mom, had very specific rules about how things went. And when we were at the Airbnb, I also noticed that the handles went backwards when I was putting things away. And I don't think I've ever been consciously aware of how much attention I pay to certain details to make sure that I figure out what the rule is and that I get it, quote, right. That pattern recognition, and also not wanting to make mistakes. And I want to be honest that in other areas, I have no clue and I don't pay attention. But that is sometimes how our neurodivergent shows up, in paying really minute detail to things so that we figure out or your silverware goes face down. Like, I don't put my silverware face down, but you put yours face down. Those little things, it's just interesting.
It's funny that you're saying that, because my silverware was always face up until I started dating a chef and someone who'd own a restaurant. So who not insisted, she's totally sweet about it, but got this idea that it should go down. And I'm not sure which rule I want to follow. The rule book of, like, because I'm a geek, I read the manual of my new dishwasher, and it said to put them up, but she says to put them down. And I guess I have to make a decision for myself. But no, I get these rules are wanting to fit in. I often think about how different areas of the country do feel almost culturally very different. I spent a little bit of time in the South, and I don't know how people could tell just by looking at me before I even opened my mouth that I was a Yankee. It's just very funny. It's very interesting. And so the reason I'm bringing that up is because I think it is these, like, we try to make sense of that or hold on to that. And there's a lot of abstractions to that, but here's something concrete.
Yeah.
There's so much that's like ambiguous and abstract, but if I get it right, which direction the things go, or do you turn them up? Do you turn them down? I mean,
right.
It's fascinating.
Yeah, it is. Another thing I wanted to talk about, I've been aware of this because I often listen back to the episodes that we record, and I've had this judgment of myself that I notice that I'll say something and you reflect very empathically and you respond, and then I don't even acknowledge what you say, and then I go on to the next thing, and I have some self-judgment about that. I've had it for a while, and my fear has been, this is what the story I make up in my head. If you're a listener and you're thinking about working with me and you're judging or observing based on my interaction with you, Jen, it's like, so if I share something, is she just not going to even respond and go back to whatever her agenda is? So I have this very harsh story in my head. I was listening to the episode that we recorded while I was in Philly, and I had that same thing come up. And then I had this realization that how we show up for the podcast is very different. Because I have a hard time keeping track of things, I often will jot down notes of things that are important that I want to talk about. And you like to just sort of show up spontaneously. So you don't take notes, which is fine. But it occurred to me that if I'm providing content and you're sitting there, then it's easy for you to respond spontaneously because you don't have an agenda. And if the tables were turned, it would totally be the same thing. Obviously, I could slow down and respond more to what you're saying, but my tasky brain gets on hand and I get back at task. And it like I felt some comfort in recognizing that. And again, this is that reflection that I have about social cues and interactions. And am I taking turns? And am I listening? Am I reflecting? Am I just steamrolling? And obviously it's my podcast, and so I can't steamroll, but even the use of that word, that I think that many of us who are neurodivergent and have gotten feedback about how we show up socially, we tend to reflect and think about it a lot because, again, I feel like when they handed out the rule book, I must have stepped out of line and gone to Starbucks and gotten a latte or something. So I just don't have a clue what those things are, but it's something that really is something that I think about a lot, not consciously, but it just happens to come up.
Yeah. Wow, there's so much in what you just said. And you're right. Like I show up and my whole job here is to reflect and to respond to. I love your tasky brain. I've never felt that you haven't held space or heard or reflected. And I know there's been times on the podcast where I have gotten emotional or opened up about something and you're like, boom, right there. Right. I do think, like, I forget what you said the other day. Not overthinking was like not an option. Like it wasn't even on the menu.
So can I just share the story?
Yeah.
So when we went away to this Airbnb, we had some people there that just had a really rough childhood. And I didn't have as much direct interaction with them because I'd gone to bed. But when we were packing up the van, and again, spatial relationships I'm really good at. So I had packed the back of the van, and then somebody brought out 2 suitcases, which meant that all the little bags needed to come out in order to get the suitcases in. And so I said something like, grumble, grumble. It would have been nice if I would have had these before. And then I thought, oh, that may be perceived as being negative or critical. And so I added more information and said on a scale of 1 to 10, where 10 is like, I'm really losing it. Like this is a 2. I'm okay. Pulled everything out, and they were apologetic, but everything appeared okay. But on the 2-hour driving home, I thought, what if I sent them into a shame attack? And because I don't know this person very well. And I even had to tell T that I'm pretty clear about telling you what works and what doesn't. If you ask, did I hear noise last night? I'm not going to go, no, I'm going to tell you, yes, I heard noise. And it may come off as being very negative. I've received that feedback that I'm negative. And it's like, I'm just going to tell you how I perceive things.
Yeah.
So I thought about this the whole time. So when we got back, I said to this person, I'm hoping that didn't upset you and that you knew that I wasn't upset by it. And they said, you're overthinking it. And she and the other person that was her age was there too. And I said, not overthinking is not even an option. It's just how my brain works. And the two of them seemed relieved and amused Like, oh my gosh, that somebody's acknowledging that they overthink and there's nothing wrong with it and they're comfortable with it. And it's true that I am going to reflect about things like that. And I am going to say something because that's just how my brain is. And for me to pretend that I don't do that would be disingenuous.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love that about you and trying to nurture in my own self this like honest and direct. And I think that it's so beautiful once we realize that overthinking is not something we're doing on purpose. It happens automatically. Right. And I know for me, in my experience, it's part of me being fascinated with the world. Right. It's part of me and I find that to be a very psychologically and emotionally healthy stance to take of wonder, curiosity, and fascination, awe. Sometimes it'll really blossom if I'm really going good with it. And then the other stuff that you were saying, like it's important to take ourselves in context, like to make broad generalizations about yourself and how you show up in the world without taking into the specific context of what we're in right now. This is your podcast, not mine. You do all of the work on this thing. I just show up and get to enjoy your company for a little while. So to remove yourself and then make broad statements about yourself, decontextualizing yourself. I was just talking with a client about this. It causes so much suffering because we over-identify with things, make them about us when they can have, it's just as much about the job you're doing right now, the role you're playing right now, the other people that you're with sometimes. And in fact, I asked you in response to that observation, like, do you need me to show up a little bit differently? I mean, I do take little notes, but they're like they're just like little jots. And so you're definitely running the show here. It's your podcast, but the context between you and me, like maybe would it be, and you answered emphatically no, that, this is how you want me to show up, but that could even change in the future. Yeah. So taking in our context is so important. We're in interaction all the time with our environment, the people in it, our histories. I mean, and this is where I just go to. It is fascinating. Yeah,
it really is. It really is.
Can we tell the truest, but also the most beautiful and generous stories about ourselves? Forget where I picked that up, but that quote has really stayed with me, and it's just beautiful. It's just beautiful, and it's so helpful. It's expansive, and it's generous, and it's healthy for us.
It really is. So 2 things. My observer is making sure that I respond to you. So I'm going to label it as part of masking. It's a conscious choice. And I was just talking with another HS therapist who's autistic. We were just talking about this morning of, is this masking? Is it being ableist? And because I value reciprocity and I value our friendship, although this is not in our friendship, this is not something I need to be conscious of. I'm there. So this is a little bit different because this is the podcast and I have my podcast brain on and then my speaker brain on. But making a conscious choice to be a little bit more aware so I can respond a little bit more to what you say, it is masking because that doesn't come naturally to me in this role. And we can make these choices. And you and I have talked about this, that I'm trying to think of the best context to talk about it. I'm going to put it in this term. If I have a client who struggles with communication with their boss and their boss perceives them as being maybe their tone is misperceived or the words that they use as being sharp, and this is just them showing up as an autistic or someone who's neurodivergent, they have a choice to not mask and continue to do that. If they value their job and feel like conforming a little bit so that they keep their job and adjust a little bit socially so that they get along and get what they want out of this job, making some adjustments, if that's a conscious choice and that's worth it to them, then that masking is okay. Those adjustments are okay. If we feel like we have to sacrifice who we are to be accepted in a situation, then is that worth it? But I think that the world sometimes gives us this opportunity of, I can show up and go, I don't care what you think. And that may end up having negative repercussions on me in an employment situation or in a friendship or in a marriage. And some things are not worth changing for, but we have to make this choice of, what is it that I want in the long run? How much do I have to give up? And is the trade-off worth it in order to have what I want? And if I want is a long-term friendship or relationship with someone, and it means that there are areas where I may need to make some adjusting because what I want in the long term and what I get is worth it, then that's perfectly acceptable. But if I'm pretzeling myself to get something that may not get me anywhere and I'm sacrificing who I am, then I may need to look at that.
You said so much there. I'm so curious about that. And I guess it's a really important distinction to make, right? It's like, when is masking an invitation and a choice to grow? I think grow in a certain direction. I imagine at some point it may no longer even feel like it's masking if it's something you get good at and feel comfortable with and motivated to learn, versus having to conform or trying to avoid something. I don't know. Like I'm totally, like, my head's going from everything that you just said.
Yeah.
I'm also just thinking, like, developmentally with kids, right? Where I know one of my questions with my kids is, like, at what point, yes, they have to live in the world and there are some things that they must conform to. And then I'm definitely very dedicated to having free thinkers. And so I find myself, I swear, if you were like a fly in the wall at my house, sometimes you might think we were aliens, because I'm like, well, it's customary in this culture to blah, blah, blah. Because they'll ask me, well, why? Why do I have to do it that way? Why? Like,
Right.
And then I'm like, you may have teachers, you may have bosses, coworkers in the future. Like, so where is that line? And then how do we hold it? And again, it's all about the individual, right? Interfacing with the context.
Yeah.
And it really depends. So it's often not even it's not the behavior that we're talking about. I guess it's the motivations. I guess it's the function of the behavior. I guess it's how we're holding the behavior. It's that choosing our attitude, or maybe not choosing. Choosing might be a poor word. Noticing, right? Do I feel put upon about this? Is this something where I can take personal responsibility so that I'm choosing it because I want to remain employed, or because I want whatever it is? And that's a lot of that knowing yourself.
Right. And that is less about being autistic or holistic, and it's more about the societal expectations and rules that were developed by holistic people about what is too much and what is not enough. I don't want to go here right now if we have time, but I really would want to rewatch it. But I just saw this really great TikTok about holistics, non-autistic people are really about being medium. And so much of being neurodivergent and autistic is about being too much or too little based on this medium. Don't talk too much. Don't make too much eye contact. You're not making enough eye contact. About social rules that, because I wasn't planning on talking about this and why I didn't really want to talk about it, is because I need to go back and review it. But I saw it this morning. It was very profound. And I love when people can frame things in a way that's not how I conceptualize things, because I think many of us think in analogies, and having more ways of thinking about things can help how our brains assimilate information.
Oh, you just said so much. I want to jump all over. Not in a bad way, but in like a fun, let's play with these concepts kind of way. When you started to talk about it, I was like, I was thinking about like the double standards that pop up. I mean, especially as women, I don't know, this medium, like, what are we talking about? This medium, right? We lose information when we talk about averages, like, and then we make that somehow be the some sort of ideal that's this mythological thing. Like, it's a myth. Like, we can't. Diversity is what's real, right? And beautiful. And yet we internalize this, you called it medium. I think of it like a middle ground, or I don't know. I understand though, but yeah, like yuck.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting, two things. And I did this in the episode where I talked about my autism, and I just want to be more mindful. For me, if I can remember, when I talk about women, I think I want to counter that with saying assigned female at birth, because we really exclude quite a number of people when we do that. So that's just one clarification.
I love that you bring that up. Thank you so much. I need that.
Thanks.
I need more practice, especially to my kids.
Thanks. It's so hard after I record something and I listen to it back, and I rarely will go back and record something new and have my editor put it in. I don't always listen to things right away, but it's very challenging when I say things that I don't mean or I'm not clear, and I just have to be okay with that. It's interesting. Steve and I were watching Shark Tank the other night, and there was this mom who was just incredibly enthusiastic about what she was selling. And a couple of the people on the panel talked about her being too much. And one of them even said, like, does your husband have to tell you to tone it down? And I was just astounded. And they were shaming her for her enthusiasm and how she was just very joyous about what she was talking about. And I want to say something. This is not to throw my husband under the bus. I love you, honey. If you know my husband, no need to share this with him because this is not to hurt his feelings. But when we talked about it afterwards, his comment was it didn't seem to affect her because I said that was shaming. And he says it wasn't shaming because she wasn't affected. I'm like, it's shaming. She may not have been negatively affected, but to tell somebody to tone it down and that they're too much and ask how their husband perceives them, that is shaming behavior. And this is a perfect example of, I think I told you that the day that, not the current kayak that I have, but the one before this arrived, I was just doing a really happy dance. And, I was told like, calm down, girl. And I'm thinking, I'm genuinely joyfully excited because my newest baby arrived and it's very happy to me and I shouldn't have to tone it down, and doing a happy dance is very appropriate. And I think looking at things in context, that we're told to suppress our joy. And then when we're not joyful, we're told to smile and to be more pleasant.
Well, hello, double stand or double bind or whatever we want to call that. I just go back. I always these days really default to those 4 things that Gabor Mate says. The one that's pertinent here is that, none of us have gotten the message that it's really safe, in fact, healthy to feel the full range of human emotions fully. And it's safe to do so. We're meant to do so. And part of just, I guess, reducing everything's, reducing to this mean or going in the middle or this tone it down. Don't be, but it's like, what? I'm like making myself speechless because I'm so frustrated that we haven't made space. Yeah.
And when we talk about looking at the rules, as we're talking, there are examples I want to bring up, and I can't remember if I've talked about them previously. So if I have, just forgive me. I had this insight with my kids, one in particular, that I tend to ask very deep and probing questions. And it's not always welcomed, but this child tends to just kind of go along, I think, because they don't know that it's okay. So when I had this awareness that I do this, I said, it's really okay to tell me if I'm asking a deep, or we're having a conversation and you don't want to go deep, just to let me know. But then they called me a week ago and had something very, very, very significant happen. And said, I'm so sorry. And, note to self, Patricia, don't ask deep probing questions, just be present. And, how are you doing? They answered in one word. We kind of sat in silence. And then I said, I'm inclined to pepper you with questions, but I want to be respectful. And they said, no, it's okay to ask questions. And what I realized was they reached out to me because I don't think that they knew how to process what had happened. And they needed me to ask questions to help them filter and sort through how they were feeling. And because I give a lot of feedback about what my observations are. And I was so grateful that we had this conversation when I got off the phone. And my thought was, my poor little autistic brain doesn't have a rule. Don't ask probing questions because it can be too much. But then if there's something big that goes on, then maybe it's okay to ask probing questions, but I don't know. And then when we were on our trip, I reached out to ask how things were going. And there were some big things that had happened, but they said they really weren't in the mood to talk, which I respect. But for those of us that have brains that are wired the way mine is, like, I want all the boxes. I want to know which box where the rule is, what the map, what to expect, how people are going to behave. And this is like, there is no rule here. And this kind of goes back to some of the work that I do with my autistic clients, because we do have this need to delineate. Is it this? Is it that? It's one way or the other way, kind of in the extremes. And oftentimes navigating life means that we need to be in uncertainty and we don't have a box for it yet. We don't have a place on the map for it. And honoring without being ableist, because many of us, I'm not saying everybody, but many of us want things to be clearly delineated because that gives us a sense of where we fit in the world, where things fit in the world. And is it worth it to learn how to navigate some of that uncertainty, that messy middle, the distress tolerance, not because that's what holistics do, but because sometimes in this world we have to navigate that. And does that reduce our suffering in learning how to do that, but not making that the norm. And I think that's the challenge, that when we are undiagnosed or we're diagnosed and we go to see a therapist or a coach that is not knowledgeable about autism and neurodivergence, they will use tools to get us to think the way they do, but that doesn't necessarily work for us. And you and I, this is a little bit of an aside, but I think this is relevant, that you and I were talking with someone who's struggling and talking about the best type of therapy that might be for them, but there's also a chance that they have a traumatic brain injury. And what we had talked about is, if this person goes to a cognitive behavioral therapist to talk about the problems with their moods, and it's something organic based on an injury to their brain, no amount of therapy is going to help that, because there's something organic neurologically that's going on. So we talked about the first thing might be to get a rule out that you don't have a traumatic brain injury. And there was some trauma, and we decided that maybe some EMDR would help with that trauma, because that's how the brain injury occurred. So this is relevant to if you suspect you're autistic or you are autistic and you're working with a therapist or a coach who's not familiar. They may be trying to get you to think in terms, or help you with your behavior, the things that you're struggling with, in a way that an holistic person would, but that doesn't work for us. And so how do you navigate that? And we can be in therapy for years and have things that don't work. This is not to throw shade on therapists. And before I knew I was autistic, I worked with a client that was autistic. I was very upfront about what my limitations were, and they came to me for something else. So I'm not drawing a line in the sand saying you shouldn't, but these are some of the things that can be problematic. And how can you know if you don't know? That was also a lot.
I would love to be, I see it. That's awesome. You said a lot there. It's so funny because I feel like I interrupt all the time, and then I'm afraid like I'll lose my thoughts or my responses. So as you were talking, what I love is this directness, this like honesty, right? That you're talking about. And then with the uncertainty stuff, right? Like I'd rather be in a place of, oh, wow, I don't know. And I'm really curious about that, than be in a place of, I think I know, but it's like a wrong knowing. And it's interesting that you bring up CBT. The way I was trained, and I have heard this, that like, so a criticism of CBT is it's kind of like you're gaslighting yourself into not, believing a different thing or thinking other thoughts. You're just thinking the wrong thoughts, and think about it this way. When how I was taught in grad school is that the reason why CBT worked wasn't because of how they thought it was working. You take out, let's just say, bad thoughts and put in good thoughts or the right thoughts or like whatever. And it's because it develops this like meta awareness about your thoughts. And so taking that concept of meta awareness, and I think of this like with consciousness, like just bumping it up a level. So I was working with a woman who was trying very hard with adult children to create a space where she wasn't falling back into patterns where she was very anxious and trying to kind of continue to do for her kids when she knew that that was against odds with their developmental stage and everything else. And she was really, really trying hard, and it was painful, and it was like just going back and forth. And, every single time it quote unquote wouldn't work. And the suggestion to, can you talk to your loved one about the struggle you're having? When you talked with your kid about, do you want probing questions? Do you not want probing? That's so respectful. It's still direct and honest. You don't have to guess. You just have to check in and get consent. And these like meta awarenesses are they can be so beautiful if you're sharing your process. So I know like with my kid, with their pronouns, like my 50-year-old brain still messes it up, and it's very painful. And me letting them know what that's like, and how they know that I'm working really hard. And I mean, my kid's just very merciful about it. But, being able to talk about what it is that we're talking about and taking, and so I don't know if that feels like that's a form of, I guess I'm confused as to like, is that in and of itself a form of masking, or I don't know where that comes from. Is that autistic? Is that holistic? Is that like, does it depend? Like, I don't know.
I don't know. I heard everything that you said, but I think because I didn't know what the question would be at the end, I wasn't listening for it. So my brain is
Good
like,
thing we recorded.
I don't know. I wasn't listening for, and this is sometimes how things work for me and it's interesting that my husband and I have this way of communicating. I don't even know how it happened, but we'll be sitting there and we'll go, the subject is concert on Friday. The subject is golfing. The subject is getting this credit card. And it's really helps me because I kind of know what file in my brain to open up because I know what we're talking about.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I think that talking about what we're talking about is just, to me, it's just such a helpful step.
Yeah.
I know my other child, my younger child, like does this emotionally. Like she'll give me her emotional context by walking to them. She wears this little pin that proudly pronounces that she is cranky. She's cranky bee is what it says. And that's another form of this, like, okay, meta awareness about the context right now, this particular morning. I can take that into consideration. She's not shamed for feeling that way. I'm not taken by surprise. And we can continue with these like layers of being direct and honest with each other.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think that's beautiful.
Oh,
and I had
is.
no idea that was the question until I got to the end. So sorry. I didn't mean to like sucker punch you there.
No, it's
good
okay.
thing we are recording. She's awesome.
So when I'm listening at 11 o'clock at night, I go, oh, that was the answer. I was thinking though, can you ask me what the question is after having said all that? Do you know what the question is? Because I heard what you said.
Well, yeah, I guess similar to, well, when I was listening, and I guess maybe not really even understanding my own status, right? Like, what am I, like, I don't know where I am. I know we've had many discussions about this between being HSP, being autistic, ADHD. I mean, I know we're neurodivergent around here. Like, that's just, I love my household. It's so fun and very not what would fit in that middle or norm.
Right.
On so many different ways. So I realized as I was talking that I'm not sure I know how to be in that conversation, that part of the conversation, talking about holistic versus autistic. And so that was sort of culminating in that question. Now, I happen to love questions more than answers anyway. So I also say it without, I mean, it's curious to talk about, and I would much rather stay in curiosity than ever like hammer out an answer, which I think is being more.
Oh, so your question was, this is what I think you're saying. Are you saying, is it ableist to want to be in that place of curiosity and questioning, or is that being disrespectful if somebody with a neurodivergent brain like mine wants to put things into categories? Was that your question?
It wasn't, but I like that one too.
Oh, okay.
I think my question was really just this broad, like, I don't know, because I love how conscientious you are. And I'm assuming, I guess I'm going to be ableist and I would welcome being called out on that. Maybe that was part of what was coming through, is some of that insecurity about that, because I don't know. I really don't know. Like, is this, so the question is like, my tendency to want to go meta, I have no idea. Maybe it's not even appropriate to ask, like, is that holistic or is that autistic? I'm not sure. Maybe it's not even part of the consideration. Maybe it doesn't matter. I don't know. I guess maybe that's where I would rely and lean in on our friendship, that you would tell me and I could accept that, just like I could that I was speaking too loudly to you the other day. Because I don't no longer have to be perfect, right? I can show up in honest and direct ways and humbly take feedback, which I think is so important to our overall health. Right. If I'm being ableist, I guess is what it's all kind of shaken out.
Well, I'm not an expert either. I'm an expert in me, and this process is unfolding for me, so I don't have an answer. We do need to wrap up, but I think I want to respond with the little knowledge that I have to what you asked, but I want to touch into something that happened between us where this dynamic came up and how we worked on it. My understanding is that bottom-up approach is how autistic brain works, which is starting with the details and then going to the bigger, broader. And holistic tends to start with the broad and then goes down to the details. But I'm not sure that we can't learn different ways of communicating and processing or how we look at things. But what I was thinking about is when we were on vacation, I received an email that just activated some history for me, and I had a big cry, and you were present for me, and I had to ask you to remind me what happened in this situation because it was so dysregulating that I don't even know what happened previously. And what I found myself is when I'm upset, I want to make meaning and sense out of things. That is what is calming and soothing to me. And I couldn't. Do you remember the phrase that you used? I didn't like it, but do you remember what it was?
No, I can kind of feel the edges of it. And maybe if I take a few minutes to think about it. And then I just had the funny thought of like, dang it, Patricia, we have to record all of our interactions. So they're either polos or, we should have. Anyway, let me think about it for a second, because I think it did touch on uncertainty.
It did.
Which I have practiced many, many years to get comfortable with. That is not, talk about masking turning into growth or something like that. Like that was hard earned.
Yeah.
And, for me. I think it was something along the lines of like how much it's okay to not know, or
something like that, which made me really uncomfortable. And so my pedantic self, which I'm proud of being pedantic, what I could land on was it's okay to not know. It's okay to be in the space of not knowing. And the reality is I practice that a lot in my life of trusting that things will work out and letting things go. And it's almost like the tabs in my brain will stay open and they're running in the background, but it's not consciously in my mind. And that at some point, and this happened during the trip with 2 relationships that I'm having some stuff around, that I just sat down and started writing, which is not something that I typically do. And that kind of got that energy out. And one person I was going to send the email to, and since I wrote it out, I'm kind of like, maybe I don't need to say anything. And I wish I had the exact words, but it was something about, can I be okay in the uncertainty or not knowing? And that felt like that's, again, if I offend any of the listeners, I'm sorry. Like I rebuke you, like that is offensive to me. And that makes me feel like you want me to sit where it's uncomfortable and I don't want to do that. But somehow the phrasing of it's okay to not know, to be in that place of not knowing, that feels comforting and soothing. So these are little things. And because you and I have this ability to talk about language, it's so easy and seamless. And as I'm talking about this, one of the relationships that was causing me some stress, we could not do this. And what it would have looked like is I would have said, I don't like when you say that, this feels better. And you being the other person would have said, why can't I just express myself? Don't I have a right to share how I'm feeling? And it's like, well, if it's upsetting me and you're trying to comfort me, then that's not really helpful. Are you willing to jump into my world and use language that's going to help me connect with you? Or is it more important for you to use language and your perspective that you have a right to say things the way that you want to, even though it's not creating connection, it's creating distance. And I'm telling you, it's creating distance. I'm asking you for what I want. I'm inviting you to join me, but you insisting that you say things the way that you need to say things because that's your right is what created part of this rupture. And I'm open to your feedback because I'm inside of it and you're outside of it.
Yeah, it's funny. It's just making me think of, I guess, different conflicts in my life and more so in the past than anything that feels very alive right now. Where, again, it depends. Like there's a time and a place for everything. Mm-hmm. So affirming someone's right to have their feelings and to share them. But is that what we're doing right now? Mm-hmm. Or are you trying to understand me? Like it's almost like taking turns. I often will suggest that people having conflict take it in several conversations. Like, let's stretch this out across days, if not weeks. Mm-hmm. Let me hear you. Let me not respond with mine. And I don't know who goes first. I tend to think that whoever's having the problem, Mm-hmm. And, I've been in situations where I would bring a problem to someone and be asked like, well, why are you making that a problem?
Mm-hmm. Why are you being so sensitive? Why do you have to talk about everything? Why can't you just let it go?
Yeah. And it's really hard to, where I go to existential loneliness and we're just not in the same bubble or circle, mm-hmm. or we're not even anywhere near understanding each other, which does take some suspension and some grounding in trying to understand.
Yeah.
So I would say to that like there's a time and a place for everything. And what are we doing? So this is a meta awareness. Like, what are we doing right now in this moment? Mm-hmm. Because if you want me to take a huge step back and you can just go ahead and you absolutely have your right to all of your thoughts and feelings. Mm-hmm. In fact, I keep getting them. I'm feeling like I'm getting barraged with them in a defensive manner. Mm-hmm. And then again, this like boils down, Gabor Mate, I love him, right? Like it boils back down to, hey, it's really okay to have your full range of human emotions fully. It's okay to be humble. It's okay to be a human with limitations, and we make mistakes. And just because I stepped on your foot didn't mean I meant to step on your foot. And do humans step on feet? Yes, they do, as a matter of fact. Am I human? Therefore, nothing human's foreign to me. And like that breath of fresh, to me, that's a breath of fresh air, and it's spacious. And it allows room. We need space in order to have understanding.
Yeah.
To hear each other. I know we got to go. We got to wrap up.
I know. I'm having some vulnerability that I think I'm still, I know I'm still having a charge on this relationship. And when I have a charge, I speak faster. My voice may have raised. And I feel a little exposed because of that. And it is what it is. But I just want to name that.
Is this the episode?
No.
Is this
I rebuke you. I think this is I think the stuff we're talking about, we need to end, but I wanted to share something really quickly because it feels really important. I work with a number of therapists, and I met with one of the therapists on Monday who had a chance to listen to kind of a backlog of episodes and didn't realize what was going on, and didn't realize that you and I hadn't met, and listened to the episode the first time that we had met. And when we started the session, she said, "How are you?" It's like, well, I got in at 4:30 this morning Eastern time, which was 1:30 Pacific time. I spontaneously decided to fly to Philly. She's like, "Did you see Jen? Did you get to see Jen?" And she was tearful, and I got tearful. And what she said is, it has been, and if I get this wrong, feel free to tell me in our session. She said, it has been so healing to see our vulnerability and our friendship grow. And she has a friendship that's very similar, but it's teaching her how to show up and be more authentic and real in her relationships and with her clients. Because we've done some risk taking in our relationship. And I always check in with her, because what we got in grad school about just show up as a stone wall and don't give anything. And the relationships that I have with my clients they're boundaried. I'm very mindful about why I share things and what I share, but I share a lot more than I feel like, I'm quote supposed to. And we had this beautiful moment of connection. And I always want to share that with you, Jen. And we've talked about this, but the work that we're doing is touching people. And a handful of people have reached out to me after the episode that I talked about being autistic, saying that they suspect that they're autistic too. And they really appreciate my vulnerability and how I'm showing up. That what we're doing really matters. We're making a difference. And I want to keep doing this, even if it's uncomfortable and even if it feels scary or vulnerable, that this is what is possible, to have amazing intimacy and satisfying relationships and kind of living on the edge when we're willing to do this work. And you show up where you're at. And if this is not where you're at, there's no expectation that you ever have to show up the way that Jen and I do.
Yeah, I love that feedback. I'm just enjoying you, and I love that. I know this is a labor of love for you, and I know it comes right from your heart. And it is so nice to hear that feedback from people.
Yeah.
And I know it's been incredibly healing for me too. And I think a lot of the safety that's here, a lot of those early attachment wounds that I had, I feel like I've really been able to address. And yeah, the risk taking, it's funny. It starts out, it doesn't feel as risky to me anymore. I don't know how it feels to you. And I know we spent quite a number of podcast episodes talking about how you have to be willing to risk the loss of the relationship in order to get to that true connection, authentic. You have to be willing to show your humanity.
Yeah.
And sometimes it does result in the loss, and then to not torture ourselves over that.
And to know that that wasn't the relationship. If I can't show up and be who I am, and that rubs people the wrong way, then that's not the relationship for me. Because I don't want to have to pretzel myself into something that makes somebody else happy but doesn't work for me. That's not love.
Right. And there's an awful lot of humans out there.
Yeah.
I think sometimes we rake ourselves over the coals when maybe we've spent some time with one that's just or maybe it was right for a while and then it isn't right, and then it grew out, whatever. Yeah. There's a ton of reasons, but the whole thing boils down to really just trust yourself. Don't throw yourself under the bus. It's all good. It's all information. Yeah. And you're in a growth pattern. Everyone's got a trajectory.
Yeah. All right. We need to go. I deeply appreciate you, Jen.
I love you tons.
Love you too. Have a great day.
Bye.
Bye.
Yeah, you too. Bye.
Hey again. So was that relatable? What do you think? Did it resonate for you? I'm always curious. I love when y'all send me emails. So if you have any thoughts and you want to reach out to either Jen or me, we both love hearing from y'all. You can reach out to me at unapologeticallysensitive@gmail.com. You can reach out to Jen at heartfulnessconsulting.com. We would love to hear from you, and I love getting feedback from you. I'm pretty sure that by the time this episode comes out, registration will still be open for the online HSP course. I am working on a course for newly diagnosed, late diagnosed, high masking women, but I just have not been able to get it together yet. So as soon as I'm able to do that, I will be talking about that, but that will be coming up in the future. If you identify as neurodivergent, all the videos we talk about it in terms of being HSP. You're welcome to take it if you think that you're autistic. I would probably, I'm just thinking about this off the top of my head, we're probably going to talk more in terms of HSP unless everybody there thinks that they're autistic. I think that under the umbrella of neurodivergence, the topics that we talk about are mindfulness and self-compassion, turning negative messages into strengths, perfectionism, embracing our emotions, self-care is non-negotiable, boundaries, communication, authenticity, and vulnerability, and creating a lifestyle that honors the HSP. And because these are videos that Jen and I already created when I wasn't aware that I was autistic, everything is in terms of HSP. So if you are recently diagnosed, high masking, assigned female at birth or assigned male at birth, and you want to learn about these topics, I am going to need to figure out what the composition of the group is to make sure that everybody feels seen, heard, and honored without alienating anybody. But if you're open and curious, I really have no idea how many of you are thinking that you might be autistic if everybody's still identifying as HSP. This is just a changing, growing process. And I really do not want to disenfranchise or alienate anybody in my language. And sometimes I'm just not as mindful of my language as I probably could be. But it's kind of a good thing. It means that I feel safe enough to just relax a little bit and not have that part of me that monitors. What I can tell you in these groups is people have connected, even no matter if you're HSP, you're autistic, we all show up very differently, but there's often a common thread of what we've experienced and what we've heard, and to be with other people that are wired like us, where there's acceptance and compassion and validation. Many people have this sense of loneliness and disconnection and don't have other people in their lives that understand them or get them, or have been told you're being too sensitive, or why are you making such a big deal out of this? What's wrong with you? You felt like an alien. So if you're looking for that sense of connection and wanting to be with other people that are wired like you, every week we have an opportunity to talk about whatever's going on with you. It always ties back into the subjects, just having a place to connect and be with other people in an environment that is safe and overseen, I think, with love and compassion. It's possible. The course will go from September 11th through November 13th or November 20th. We're going to cap the group at 8 members, maybe less depending on how many people sign up. If there's enough to do 2 small groups, that would be my preference. Registration is going to start on August 16th and go through August 22nd for early bird registration. And then regular registration is going to go from August 23rd and end on August 30th. And I'm pretty sure that this episode will be out before the 30th of August. If you want more information and the price and to register, you can go to my website, unapologeticallysensitive.com. There's an HSP groups page. There's lots of information there. There's videos, there's little short audiograms, there's podcast episodes, if you are someone who loves information. If you're interested in working with me, I think relationships, attachment, skills, how do you navigate in the world, those are things that I really rock at, whether you're autistic or neurodivergent, HSP, ADHD. If you've got kids that you're struggling with, I don't see children, but because I've had to work with my own kids and have a great understanding, that's something I can help you with. Again, you can go to my website, unapologeticallysensitive.com, and there's a contact me page. My son just did some new headshots. Some of them are up there. I'm so proud of that kid. Anyways, I hope you are doing well. Remember, sensitivity is nothing to apologize for. How you show up in the world is perfect. You have a right to be here, to take up space. Who you are matters. You make a difference. All your feelings are okay. Expressing yourself is fine. You are not too much. You are not too needy. You are just right. Your creativity, your personal expression is what the world needs. Who you are is important and you matter. Have a blessed day.